Seated on the dais with me, the chairman of the Indian Steel Association, Dilip Omanji, Sajjan Jindal ji, TV Narendran ji, Atul Bhatt Saheb, Srimati Shoma Mandal ji, Abudai ji, Secretary General of the Indian Steel Association, Alok Sai ji, a person who has spent decades in this industry and who today will be the proud recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award. Seated with me here, Jiten Mehra ji, members of the Indian Steel Association, upstream, downstream contributors to the steel industry, and my friends from the media. I'm indeed delighted to be here at the third conclave of the Indian Steel Association. We've all come out from a very, very trying time post-COVID. And we're having this conclave, I believe, after a gap of 2 years. But suffice to say that our steel industry is come out of this very, very trying and difficult time stronger, more resilient, more global, more focused, and more committed. So my congratulations, first of all, to all our stakeholders present here. From raw material, to value addition, to finished product, to our customers. And indeed, our sector has witnessed a huge transformation from initially being one of the core drivers of industrialization in our country. Because steel is the foundation or the knee of any economic superpower across the world. If you go back in history, whether one looks at Europe or the industrialization era in the United States of America, or closer to home, Southeast Asia, the Japanese economy, the Korean economy. Very key to that was the focus on the steel sector. And so therefore, from becoming one of the core drivers of industrialization to today, the steel sector driving the thought, the process that the Prime Minister has put forward of an Atmanirbhar Bharat. Again, the steel sector has a tremendous role to play in the actualization of that vision. India in the last 8 years has emerged globally. From being the fourth largest producer, we are today the second largest producer and the second largest consumer of steel. And we are today on a new sustainable growth path. A growth path envisioned by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji that looks at putting India as a world-class hub for infrastructure by our Shatabdi Kal, which is 2047. And therefore the whole focus on infrastructure, be it railways, airports, roads, our engineering area, automotive, capital goods, across the board. And it's a true unleashing of the animal spirits of our economy. And that true unleashing of the animal spirits of our economy is based upon more demand and more consumption. And that more demand and more consumption, as T.V. Narendran ji also said in his opening remarks, is creating opportunities for greater expansion and greater capacities. And I think today is the time that we need to take that pledge of putting in place a very strong policy foundation based on the three C's of commitment, collaboration, and confidence. And that 3C process of commitment, collaboration, and confidence is what will lead us into the next era of growth, of becoming one of the most powerful economies and strong economies on the global stage in the years to come. Today, the platform that we are standing on, ladies and gentlemen, has been unleashed by the massive reforms that have taken place in the last 8 years. Across the board. The envisioning of a national steel policy in 2017, which looked at a target by 2047 of 300 million tons per annum capacity formation in place. Looked at the drivers that need to be in place to be able to ensure that translation of steel capacity in our country. And along with the national steel policy, the domestically made in India steel policy for procurement in government tenders, to make sure that we give a fillip to our integrated steel producers, our secondary steel industry, to make sure that we rapidly move towards the thought of Atmanirbhar Bharat. And I'm glad to report to you today that this policy of domestically manufactured iron and steel has resulted in a saving of almost close to 22,400 crores in terms of imports into our country. So these are the foundational pillars. The NSP 2017, the DMISP, and according to these founding pillars, today India has moved tremendously. A capacity that has come in place in the last 8 years from a low of 100 million tons per annum has increased by 50% to 150 million tons per annum. Our capacity in terms of production has increased from 80 million tons per annum to almost 121 million tons per annum. Our per capita consumption of steel, which was at abysmal low of close to 58 kilos per person in India, lower than Venezuela, Ecuador, today in 8 years has grown by 50% to almost 78 kilos per capita. We have become from becoming a net importer of steel to a net exporter of steel. From the fourth largest producer of steel to the second largest producer of steel. This is the leverage and the transformation that we have seen in the last 8 years. But as the oft-repeated adage goes, we have come a long way to go, but there are miles to go before we sleep. And therefore the government, thinking of that possibility, is looking at the levels of ease of doing business in India. Today we have graduated to the 37th fastest ease of doing business country in the world. Looking at bringing in foreign direct investments. FDI into India has almost trebled in the last 8 years. And along with that, the new initiative that Government of India under the Ministry of Steel has taken of the PLI scheme, Productivity Linked Incentive Scheme for Specialty Steel. In areas such as coated and plated steel, high strength and wear resistant steel, specialty rails, alloy steel products, steel wires, electrical steel. And I'm glad to report to you today that the culmination of this scheme at its very outset has resulted in 79 applications from 35 countries, 35 companies, resulting in an investment of close to 46,020 crores, an increase in capacity of almost 26 million tons, and an employment generation potential of almost 69,785 people. This PLI scheme will give a new fillip, I certainly believe, to our sector, to value-added production, and along with that, to domestic demand in the coming days as well. In the last 3 or 4 months since I've taken office, it has been my imperative to coordinate and collaborate with all our stakeholders, the integrated steel plants, the SSIs, and understand what the pain points are, because I believe that the role of government, the role of ministry, cannot in the year 2022 be that of a regulator. Our role has to be that of a facilitator or a collaborator. We are not sitting at opposite ends of the table. We are sitting on the same side of the table. And in your success lies the government's success and the country's success. And that is the notion with which we have to work. And it is with that thought, with that fervor, with that energy, that we have been working with both our advisory groups. I've set up one advisory group for integrated steel plants. I've set up a second advisory group for the secondary steel sector. Understanding your pain points, trying to resolve them, coordinating with other various ministries. As Prime Minister has always said, we must not work in silos. There must be a whole of government approach, because when there is a whole of government approach, then we will see a whole of India approach. And that is the passion with which we have worked over the last 4.5 months. One of our key challenges today is on the raw material side. And we have worked with the Ministry of Mines, the Ministry of Coal. The process is still on, both for iron ore, of which India has a huge surplus. We produce 253 million tons, 53 million tons less than 58 grade, and almost 200 million tons greater than 58 grade, of which we consume 215 million tons. Coking coal, of which there is a surfeit because we import almost 90% of it. Looking at alternatives for coking coal sourcing as well from different countries. We have put in place a coking coal mission where we're looking at coal gasification plants through the Ministry of Coal of almost 100 million tons per annum in the near future. And along with that, making sure, as Shomaji said in her opening remarks, that our steel industry also looks at the future of the steel industry globally. In the years to come, as the Prime Minister said in his address on 15th of August 2021, it is imperative that our industry looks at the circular economy. It is imperative that we look at green steel. And therefore the move has to be now. We cannot have an adversarial relationship with nature. We must have a symbiotic relationship with nature. And therefore, the linear model of economic growth, the model of take, make, and dispose, cannot be acceptable anymore. And therefore, we must look at various other possibilities, because the day is not that far, as we are already known as a hard-to-abate sector, where steel making can no longer be sourced from coking coal and iron ore. It will have to be from scrap. It will have to be from green steel, whether coal gasification, syngas, hydrogen, or from the circular economy. India today produces close to 26 million tons of scrap. We import 4 million tons. But globally, that source is also becoming very difficult. And therefore, we work with the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways to make sure that we have a process and a rubric in place countrywide to ensure sourcing of end-of-life vehicles, of which we have a huge surplus in our country. But the regulatory system has to be in place. The incentivization has to be in place to allow for that to come in as a raw material. It still functions mainly in the disaggregated sector. We must be able to aggregate that. And therefore, we're working on a policy for the circular economy as in the days to come. And I certainly believe that we must take the pledge today to reduce carbon emissions by a minimum 30 to 40%. That we have to do as an industry. In the days to come, I do believe, as TV Narendran ji said, that we must make in India, but not only for India. We must make in India, but make for the world. And I believe that within India, the steel industry has a tremendous potential to be able to do that. The Made in India brand must rise from those sectors which were earlier only privy to the public sector. And a fine example for you of that is the new Airbus C295 facility that has been put in place. The foundation stone that was laid by the Prime Minister in Vadodara last month, where Airbus for the first time will be putting in place its stamp of producing C295 aircraft from India in the days to come. And that sourcing of raw materials such as steel must also come from India. And therefore, with my two advisory committees, we are also working on a Made in India brand for steel. What the components of that Made in India brand will be. So in addition to the steel being stamped as SAIL steel or RINL steel or Tata steel or Jindal steel, it will also be stamped with the Made in India brand. And we've done the back-end integration work for the Ministry of Commerce and Industry on that sector. The Ministry of Commerce and Industry will come out with the logo of the Made in India brand based on Prime Minister's approval. But each vertical industry in India must do the back-end integration of that. What are the levers? What are the quality procedures that will go in to be able to have that brand on your product? And I'm glad to report to you today that our two advisory committees, along with my ministry, have been working extremely hard with private sector companies to come up with that formulation, that rubric of what those quality levels will be. And we are ready for the Made in India brand, once unleashed by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, to be able to adopt that, at least in our sector, for Made in India steel to go out to the rest of the world. So I believe today that the deliberations that I have noticed while I have read the scheduled events will cover a diverse array of topics. From drones for surveillance, to carbon neutrality, to adoption of advanced technology like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, a lot of which is being used by many of our companies within India already. But I urge you that through this day of deliberations, we must come up with an agenda as well for our industry over the next 2 decades to really firmly plant ourselves as a world leader in the area of steel in the days to come. I also look forward to a summary of your deliberations today in terms of what government must do in partnership with all of you to ensure that that vision is realized over the next 15 years as we proceed from our Shatabdi Kal to our Amrit Kal in India by 2047. With these words, I formally inaugurate the 3rd Indian Steel Conclave, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you very much for having me.